The wind howled like a hungry wolf through the cracks of the Gothic chapel's broken stained glass windows, an ancient lament that seemed to echo Grandfather Ilara's own misfortune. Driven from their village by a cruel landlord, he and his young grandchildren, Leah and Leo, found refuge in that mound of cold, moss-covered stones, a place everyone in the hamlet called the Cursed Hill. To the twins, however, with their bright, innocent eyes, the chapel was not a ruin, but a magical castle, a realm of shadows and secrets to be explored. Grandfather, with his calloused hands and heavy heart, knew the magic they truly needed was the warmth of a fire and the sustenance of bread. Day after day, he battled the biting cold and gnawing hunger, cleaning moss from the walls, improvising a fire on the broken altar, transforming despair into a home. He told ancient legends of forgotten kings and hidden treasures, not just to entertain the little ones, but because a part of him, the wise part that knew the whispers of the past, believed the chapel held more than just birds' nests and echoes of lost prayers. It was while scraping a particularly stubborn layer of ivy and grime from a side wall, revealing the cold stone beneath, that his wrinkled fingers felt a crevice that shouldn't have been there. With an effort that made his bones creak, he pushed, and a small compartment sprang open, revealing not a mirror, but a metallic glint and the yellowed edge of an ancient parchment. There, hidden for centuries, lay the royal seal of a forgotten kingdom and a deed that would forever change the destiny of the Gothic chapel's last heirs. The parchment, yellowed by time and sealed with a crest Grandfather Ilara had never seen, felt heavy in his calloused hands. The metallic glint of the royal seal, now exposed to the faint light of the improvised fire, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, an echo of centuries dormant. His wrinkled fingers trembled as he unrolled the papyrus, revealing elegant yet almost illegible calligraphy in an ancient tongue. Leah and Leo, oblivious to the gravity of the discovery, played with shadows on the wall, transforming the ruin into a stage for their childish fantasies. But for Grandfather, the silence that followed the parchment's opening was deafening, filled only by the wind's howl and the crackle of wood in the fire. At first, the words were a tangle of mystery, but as his tired eyes strained, syllables and phrases began to connect, forming a narrative that chilled his blood and ignited a spark of hope in his heart. It was not a deed of ownership, nor a common will. It was a prophecy. It spoke of a lost kingdom, of a threatened royal lineage, and of a queen or princess pregnant fleeing persecution to find refuge in a buried church. The Gothic chapel, he realized with a shiver. The prophecy described a wall of thorns that guarded a secret, a magic mirror that would reveal the heir's future and the whereabouts of the lost crown. Grandfather Ilara felt the weight of history on his shoulders. The chapel was not just a shelter, it was a sanctuary, a converging point for a grand destiny. The last heirs mentioned in the deed were not his grandchildren, but the unborn child, destined to be king. The Cursed Hill was, in fact, a fortress of secrets, protected by ancient magic and by oblivion. The tension in the air became palpable, not only from the cold seeping through the cracks, but from the imminence of something monumental. Suddenly, a distinct sound broke the wind's lament. It was not the rustling of leaves or the snapping of branches, but a muffled groan, followed by a slow, heavy dragging sound coming from the main entrance, now partially blocked by rubble. Grandfather Ilara hid the parchment under his cloak, his heart pounding like a war drum. He signaled for Leah and Leo to hide behind the broken altar, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. The figure that emerged from the darkness was a woman. Her dark hair was tangled and covered in dust, her clothes torn and dirty, yet there was an unwavering dignity in her posture, even in her exhaustion. Her deep blue eyes carried the pain of 1,000 battles and the desperate hope for a future. and the prominent belly beneath her rags left no doubt. She was pregnant. It was Lyra, the pregnant widow of the prophecy, though grandfather did not yet know her name. She stumbled inside, her eyes sweeping the chapel's interior with a mix of despair and recognition. It was as if she had been guided by an invisible force, an ancestral memory of the place. She collapsed near one of the side walls, the same one grandfather Ilara had begun to clean, but which was still covered by a dense layer of ivy and twisted roots. It was not just common ivy. These were thorny branches, intertwined almost impenetrably, forming a living, menacing barrier. The wall of thorns of the prophecy. Lyra, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, extended a trembling hand towards the wall. Her fingers brushed the thorns, which seemed to recede slightly, as if recognizing her. Grandfather Ilara, watching from his shadow, felt a chilling certainty. He was not the hero of this story, but a guardian, a link. That parchment was not for him, but for her. He approached slowly, revealing his presence. Lyra startled, but upon seeing grandfather's kind, tired face, a spark of relief passed through her eyes. He said not a word, merely extended the parchment. Lyra took it, her eyes fixed on the royal seal. She unrolled the papyrus, and as she read, a new strength seemed to infuse her. With renewed determination, Lyra turned to the wall of thorns. Ignoring the pain and exhaustion consuming her, she began to tear away the branches and roots. Each thorn that pierced her skin was a sacrifice, each tug a prayer. The pregnancy made every movement a burden, but the vision of her child's future, the promise of a kingdom, propelled her. Her hands bled, but she did not stop. The thorns seemed to resist with a supernatural force, but Lyra's will was stronger. Slowly, painfully, the living barrier began to yield. As the last thorns fell away, revealing the stone beneath, Lyra felt a different surface. It was not the cold, uneven rock of the chapel. It was smooth, dark, and strangely warm to the touch. With a final effort, she wiped away the dirt and moss, and the flickering light of Grandfather Ilara's fire reflected off a polished surface. It was not stone. It was a mirror, an ancient and mysterious mirror embedded in the wall, waiting for her for centuries. A faint glow emanated from its depths, promising secrets and revelations. The flickering light of the fire danced upon the newly revealed surface, no longer the cold stone of the chapel, but a mirror. It was not an ordinary mirror, of polished glass and gilded frame. This one was ancient, its frame seemingly carved from the rock itself, adorned with forgotten symbols that twisted like petrified vines. The surface, of dark obsidian, seemed to absorb the scant light, yet simultaneously emanated a faint, inviting glow, like a well of deep, mysterious waters. Lyra, her hands still bleeding and her body exhausted, felt a shiver that did not come from the cold. It was the sensation of being on the brink of a threshold, of a secret that had awaited centuries to be unveiled. Grandfather Ilara, with Leah and Leo peeking from behind him, approached cautiously. His wise eyes, which had seen so many seasons and so many sorrows, now gleamed with a mix of reverence and apprehension. The prophecy, once merely words on a yellowed parchment, took form before them. The wall of thorns had yielded, and the magic mirror was there, calling. Lyra extended her hand again, her fingers brushing the dark surface. It was strangely warm, pulsing with a subtle energy. At her touch, the symbols carved into the frame seemed to ignite with a bluish glow, faint at first, but quickly intensifying, filling the small space with an ethereal light. The mirror, once a window to nothingness, began to transform. The darkness in its depths stirred, like smoke in a cauldron, and then images began to emerge. They were not reflections of the present, but glimpses of a distant and glorious future. Lyra saw a kingdom, Not the ruin and desolation that pursued her, but green fields and prosperous cities, tall towers that scraped the sky, a people smiling under a bright sun. And at the center of it all, in an opulent hall, adorned with tapestries and banners, stood a throne. On it, seated with a posture of dignity and strength, was a man. His features were Lyra's, but more mature, more defined, with wisdom carved into his face and authority emanating from every gesture. His eyes, a deep blue like hers, radiated justice and compassion. On his head rested a crown. It was her son, the child she carried in her womb, destined to be king. An overwhelming wave of emotion hit Lyra. Warm tears streamed down her grimy cheeks, mixing with the dried blood from her wounds. It was the hope she had almost lost, the promise of a future that seemed impossible. Grandfather Elara watched in silence, his own eyes moist, while Leah and Leo, forgetting their fear, pointed at the shimmering images with childish wonder. But the vision did not stop there. The image of the king on his throne began to recede, and the mirror focused on a detail, not a map nor a riddle, but a symbol Lyra instinctively recognized, though she had never seen it before. The stylized fleur-de-lis of her family's royal crest, but intertwined with the roots of an ancient tree. And then the image moved again, not outside the chapel, but inside into the very walls of that sanctuary. The mirror showed a specific corner of the chapel, a niche hidden behind one of the thickest columns, covered by centuries of dust and cobwebs. The vision penetrated the stone, revealing a small, secret compartment. And there, resting on faded velvet, was the crown. Not the crown Lyra's son wore in the vision of the future, but an older, simpler crown, yet unmistakable in its majesty. It was the lost crown, the symbol of the lineage, the artifact that would seal her son's destiny. The image of the crown remained for an instant, engraving itself in Lyra's mind, before the mirror's bluish glow began to diminish. The dark surface returned to its original opacity, the symbols on its frame faded, and the warmth dissipated. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Lyra's ragged breathing and the crackle of the fire. Lyra staggered back, her body trembling no longer from cold or exhaustion, but from the magnitude of what she had just witnessed. Grandfather Elara steadied her, his eyes fixed on the now inert mirror. "It's real," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Everything is real." Lyra looked at Grandfather, her blue eyes burning with new determination. The pain of the thorns in her hands, the exhaustion consuming her, all seemed insignificant before the vision of her son as king. The path would be long and perilous, but the prophecy had given her a compass. She knew where the crown was, she knew what she had to do. The chapel, once a refuge of despair, was now the starting point of an epic journey, the cradle of a future king. The tension had not diminished. On the contrary, it had transformed. From a struggle for survival, it had become a race against time, against fate, to reclaim what was her son's by right. Lyra, the pregnant widow, was ready to fight. The image of the crown, etched into Lyra's mind, was more than a vision. It was a command. The mirror, now opaque and silent, had played its part, revealing a glorious future for her son and the path to achieve it. But between the vision and reality lay an abyss of dangers and uncertainties. Exhaustion still weighed on her limbs. The pain of the thorns in her hands was a constant reminder of her sacrifice, but a new energy, fueled by hope, pulsed in her veins. Grandfather Elara, with a look that mixed admiration and concern, steadied Lyra, feeling the fever of her determination. Leah and Leo, still marveling at the mirror's spectacle, remained silent, their small hearts beating at the accelerated rhythm of the adults. The chapel's silence, once a refuge, now seemed filled with tense anticipation, as if the very stones were awaiting the next step. Lyra did not hesitate. Her eyes swept the chapel's interior, searching for the niche the mirror had revealed. "Behind one of the thickest columns," she murmured, her voice hoarse but firm, "covered by centuries of dust and cobwebs." Grandfather Ilara nodded, understanding the urgency. He picked up a glowing piece of wood from the fire, transforming it into an improvised torch. The flickering light danced across the walls, revealing the elongated and distorted shadows of the massive columns that supported the partially collapsed ceiling. There were 3 of them, imposing and corroded by time. Lyra pointed to the column nearest the altar, the same one Grandfather Ilara had inspected before, but dismissed as a simple pillar. The mirror's vision had been precise, penetrating the stone and showing the secret compartment. She approached, Grandfather Ilara close behind, lighting the way. The column was truly massive, its surface rough and cold to the touch, covered by a thick layer of dirt and moss. Lyra's fingers, still sensitive and wounded, began to feel the stone. She searched for any irregularity, any crack, any hint of the hidden niche. With each touch, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, but the image of her son, King, propelled her. Grandfather Ilara, with his torch, illuminated every inch, his experienced eyes seeking what Lyra's could feel. "Here," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible, her fingers finding a subtle indentation, almost imperceptible beneath the grime. It was not a door nor a lever, but an area that felt slightly less solid, as if a part of the stone had been carefully fitted. With renewed effort, Lyra began to scrape away the dirt with her fingernails, feeling the texture of the stone change. Grandfather Ilara, noticing her difficulty, offered his dagger. Lyra took it, the blade cold and sharp in her hands. With careful movements, she scraped away the dirt, revealing the edges of a stone panel. It was an ingenious mechanism, designed to blend perfectly with the column, hidden by centuries of oblivion. As Lyra worked, a distinct sound, louder and closer than before, broke the night's silence. It was not the wind nor the muffled groan. It was a heavy dragging accompanied by a dry snap, like branches breaking under considerable weight. It came from the main entrance, the same one Lyra had entered through. The tension in the chapel became almost unbearable. Leah and Leo huddled even closer behind Grandfather Ilara, their eyes wide with terror. Grandfather Ilara turned, the torch raised, illuminating the darkness of the entrance. A gigantic, shapeless shadow loomed through the rubble, blocking the scant moonlight. 2 red eyes, like glowing embers, gleamed in the darkness. It was not a common animal nor a man. It was a creature of the night, a forgotten guardian of the hill, awakened by the desecration of its secrets. Lyra, however, did not avert her gaze from the column. She felt she was close. Adrenaline surged through her veins, mixing with fear, but the urgency of finding the crown was greater. She pressed the panel, trying to find the release point. There was no handle, no pull. It was pure, ancient ingenuity. The dragging sound outside intensified, followed by a low, guttural growl that made the chapel floor vibrate. It was a primal, savage sound that chilled everyone's blood. Grandfather Ilara took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his dagger, but he knew he would be no match for whatever was out there. With a final, desperate effort, Lyra felt a soft click. The stone panel yielded slightly, revealing a dark crack. She thrust her fingers into the crack and pulled. With a slow, heavy creak, the panel opened inward, revealing a small, rectangular compartment. The light from Grandfather Ilara's torch penetrated the darkness of the niche. Inside, resting on faded velvet almost disintegrated by time, it was there, the crown. It was not the glittering, opulent jewel her son wore in the vision of the future, but a piece of darkened metal adorned with semi-precious stones that had lost their luster over the centuries. It was simple, rustic, yet its form was unmistakable. It was the crown of the lineage, the symbol of ancestral authority, proof that the prophecy was real. An air of dignity and history emanated from it, an invisible weight Lyra felt the moment her eyes fell upon it. Lyra extended a trembling hand and took it. It was heavier than it looked, the metal cold and solid in her fingers. At her touch, a subtle energy seemed to course through her, not magical in the sense of a spell, but a feeling of connection to the past, to the kings and queens who had worn it before. It was a legacy, a responsibility. At the exact moment Lyra held the crown, the growl outside transformed into a piercing howl, a cry of fury and frustration that echoed through the chapel's ruins. The sound was so powerful, it made the stones tremble and the fire crackle. Something was trying to get in. Something was furious. Grandfather Ilara turned completely, the torch raised, illuminating the entrance. A gigantic, shapeless shadow loomed through the rubble, blocking the scant moonlight. Two red eyes, like glowing embers, gleamed in the darkness. It was not a common animal nor a man. It was a creature of the night, a forgotten guardian of the hill, awakened by the desecration of its secrets. "Run, Lyra!" Grandfather Ilara cried, his voice trembling, but his stance defensive. "Take the crown! Save the future!" Lyra clutched the crown to her belly, her heart pounding wildly. The vision of her son as king, the promise of a future, now seemed an immense burden. The crown was the key, but also the lure. She had found what she sought, but now she needed to flee. The chapel, once a sanctuary, had become a trap. The race for survival had begun again, more intense and dangerous than ever. The creature's piercing howl tore through the air, a cry of fury and frustration that made the chapel's ancient stones tremble. Lyra clutched the crown to her belly, the cold, heavy metal now a burden, a magnet for danger. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, mixing with the intensifying growl from the entrance. "Run, Lyra!" Grandfather Ilara's voice was a desperate command, but his posture was that of a warrior, the torch raised like a pathetic weapon against whatever was out there. "Take the crown! Save the future!" But where to run? The main entrance, the only way they knew, was blocked by a gigantic shadow. Lyra felt the ground vibrate again, stronger this time, and a sound of shattering stone announced the creature's forced entry. A piece of the doorframe gave way, revealing an even larger gap in the darkness, and through it, two red eyes, like glowing embers, gleamed with ancestral malevolence. It was not a common animal. It was a shapeless mass of shadows and twisted muscles, with claws that scraped the stone, leaving deep grooves. Its body was covered in dark, matted fur, and its head, low and broad, seemed a monstrosity of nature, with sharp teeth revealed in a guttural growl. The smell of damp earth and something putrid, like decaying flesh, filled the air, suffocating Lyra. Leah and Leo, paralyzed with terror, clung to Grandfather Ilara's legs, their small bodies trembling uncontrollably. Grandfather Ilara, with a look of pure determination, gently pushed them behind him, shielding them with his own fragile body. "No time for fear, Lyra," he said, his voice strained. "Behind the altar, there's a crypt, an escape tunnel for priests in times of siege. It's blocked, but it's our only chance." Lyra did not hesitate. With the crown firmly in her hands, she ran towards the altar, adrenaline pulsing through her veins. The creature, now partially visible, was even more terrifying than the shadow suggested. Its size was colossal, and every movement it made caused the entire chapel to groan. It dragged itself, but with surprising speed, its eyes fixed on the crown Lyra held. Grandfather Ilara, with the torch in one hand and his dagger in the other, positioned himself between Lyra and the creature. "Go, I'll hold them off." "No!" Lyra cried, panic tightening her throat. She couldn't leave him. He was all that remained of her family, the last link to the past her son was destined to inherit. But Grandfather Ilara did not hear her. With a cry of defiance, he hurled the torch towards the creature, which recoiled a step, hissing, its red eyes flickering in the darkness. The fire, though small, seemed to bother it. It was a momentary but precious distraction. Lyra reached the altar, a massive stone block covered by centuries of dust and debris. Behind it, as Grandfather Ilara had said, was a stone wall that looked slightly different from the rest. There was no handle, no visible crack. It was a secret door, designed to be invisible. "Look for a lever, a symbol!" Grandfather Ilara cried, his voice now closer, indicating he was being pushed back by the creature. The sound of claws scraping stone and a furious growl filled the chapel. Lyra fumbled over the cold, rough surface, her wounded fingers aching with every touch. She felt a protrusion, a subtle relief that did not seem natural. With a desperate effort she pushed. Nothing. She tried again, harder, feeling sweat trickle down her forehead. Suddenly, a dry click, and the stone rotated slightly inward, revealing a small crack. It was not a lever, but an ingenious pressure mechanism. Lyra thrust her fingers into the crack and pulled with all her might. With an agonizing creak, the stone wall moved, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel, smelling of damp earth and mold. "Grandfather Ilara, here!" Lyra cried, her voice choked with urgency. The creature, sensing the opening, let out an even more deafening howl and lunged, knocking Grandfather Ilara down with a blow from its gigantic paw. The old man fell heavily, the torch extinguished, his dagger flying away. Leah and Leo screamed in terror. Lyra's heart froze. She saw Grandfather Ilara try to get up, but the creature was upon him, its red eyes gleaming with murderous intent. There was no time. "Leah! Leo! Come!" Lyra cried, reaching out to the children. The little ones, driven by terror, ran to her, slipping and stumbling. Lyra pulled them into the dark tunnel, the smell of earth and the darkness swallowing them. She looked back at Grandfather Ilara, who now lay motionless under the creature's colossal shadow. A knot tightened in her throat, but she could not stop. Her children's lives, her son's future, depended on her. With a final look of pain and determination, Lyra pushed the stone door of the tunnel, which creaked and closed with a dull thud, sealing them in darkness. The creature's howl echoed from the other side, a sound of contained fury, but the door seemed to hold. They were in a narrow tunnel, the darkness almost total, broken only by a sliver of light from a crack in the ceiling, revealing tree roots infiltrating the stone. Lyra hugged Leah and Leo, who cried softly, trembling in her arms. The crown was still clutched against her body, a cold, constant weight. The pain of Grandfather Ilara's loss was overwhelming, but the vision of her son as king, the promise of a future, burned in her mind. She had found the crown, but the price had been terrible. Now they were trapped in a dark tunnel, not knowing where it led, and the creature, the guardian of the cursed hill, was out there, furious. The epic journey had only just begun, and every step was a deeper plunge into uncertainty and danger. Lyra, the pregnant widow, with the crown in her hands and the future of a kingdom in her womb, was now alone, fleeing into the darkness. The darkness was a heavy, dense cloak that swallowed air and sound. The dull thud of the stone door closing echoed for an instant, before being muffled by the earth and the oppressive silence of the tunnel. Lyra pressed Leah and Leo against her, their small bodies trembling uncontrollably, their sobs muffled by the fabric of their clothes. The smell of damp earth, mold, and a suffocating antiquity filled her nostrils, mixing with the metallic odor of fear. The crown, still in her hands, was a cold, constant weight, a chilling reminder of the sacrifice that had just been made. The image of Grandfather Ilara, fallen under the creature's colossal shadow, etched itself into her mind like a burning scar. He had sacrificed himself, for her, for the children, for the future. The pain was a tight knot in her throat, a silent scream that threatened to tear her chest, but there was no time for mourning. Not here, not now. Her children's lives, the promise of the kingdom, depended on her strength, on her ability to move forward. "It's all right, my loves," Lyra whispered, her voice hoarse, trying to infuse a calm she did not feel. "We're safe now. We'll find a way out." But the darkness was so absolute, it seemed to suck away any hope. Her eyes, accustomed to the chapel's gloom, now struggled against total blindness. She extended her hand, feeling the cold, rough wall, sensing the dampness and the irregular texture of the raw stone. The tunnel was narrow, barely allowing her to turn, and the ceiling was low, forcing her to stoop. Every step was an uncertainty. The ground was uneven, covered with small, loose stones and earth, and Lyra stumbled with every movement, protecting her belly with one hand and holding the children with the other. Leah and Leo, though terrified, clung to her with desperate strength, their small hearts beating in unison with hers. The creature's howl, muffled by the stone, could still be heard, a lament of fury that seemed to vibrate in the tunnel's very walls, a constant reminder of the danger they had left behind. Lyra felt panic begin to set in. No light, no direction, in an underground labyrinth that could lead nowhere. How had the medieval priests navigated this? She felt more intensely, searching for any clue, any sliver of light. It was then that her fingers brushed something different on the wall. It was not stone, it was metal, a small oil lantern, forgotten perhaps by some hurried priest in times of siege. With trembling hands, Lyra tried to open it. It was stuck, covered by centuries of dust and rust. She forced it, and with a metallic creak, the lid yielded. The wick, miraculously, was still intact. But how to light it? She had no fire. Despair threatened to overwhelm her again. But then, a memory. Grandfather Ilara's torch. The fire he had used to distract the creature. Where was his dagger? Lyra remembered Grandfather's dagger, which had flown from his hand when the creature struck him. She didn't have the dagger, nor a way to make fire. But the crown. The crown she held. It was an ancient object, imbued with a subtle energy, as she had felt when touching it. Could it be possible? With a thread of hope, Lyra brushed the crown against the lantern's wick. Nothing. She tried again, harder, feeling the crown's energy as a tingling in her fingers. Suddenly, a small spark, almost imperceptible, jumped from the darkened metal to the wick. Then another, and another. With a gentle breath, the wick smoldered, and to her indescribable relief, a small, yellowish flame sprang forth, flickering in the darkness. The lantern's faint light revealed the tunnel in its entirety. It was even more claustrophobic than she had imagined. The walls were of raw stone, with tree roots infiltrating through cracks in the ceiling like twisted veins. The floor was uneven, with puddles of water and mud in some places, but the light also brought immense relief. Lyra saw Leah and Leo's pale faces, their eyes wide, but now with a glimmer of hope. "Come, my loves," she said, her voice firmer now. "We have light. We'll find our way." They began to move forward again, the lantern raised, casting dancing shadows on the damp walls. The tunnel seemed to stretch indefinitely, curving and descending in a gentle spiral. Lyra felt the exhaustion in her bones, every muscle protesting, but the vision of her son as king, the promise of a future, was a beacon in her mind. She could not fail. As they advanced, the tunnel began to change. The raw stone walls gave way to more worked blocks with ancient inscriptions and carved symbols, almost erased by time and dampness. These were symbols Lyra had never seen, but which seemed to exude an aura of power and mystery. She wondered if they were runes of protection, or perhaps the history of those who had built that refuge. The air grew colder, and a distant sound of running water began to echo. Lyra felt a chill, not just from the cold, but from the intuition that the tunnel was not merely an escape route, but a path to something deeper, more ancient. The crown in her hand seemed to vibrate subtly, as if responding to the place's energy. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a larger circular chamber, with a well in the center from which the sound of water came. The chamber was adorned with more inscriptions, and in the ceiling, an opening allowed a sliver of silvery moonlight to penetrate, illuminating the dark water of the well. It was a strange and beautiful sight, a hidden sanctuary beneath the earth, but beauty was quickly replaced by terror. In the center of the chamber, beside the well, stood a statue. It was not a statue of a saint or a king, but of a creature, a shapeless creature with claws and red eyes carved into the dark stone. It was the creature, the guardian of the hill, frozen in stone, yet still a chillingly real representation of the horror they had faced. Leah and Leo screamed, clinging to Lyra, pointing at the statue with trembling fingers. Lyra's heart pounded. Was it a warning? A reminder that danger was always present, even in its petrified form? She hugged the children, trying to calm them, but her own eyes were fixed on the statue, which seemed to watch them with a silent malevolence. The water in the well bubbled softly, and Lyra realized it was not just a well, but a spring. The moonlight reflected on the surface, creating an ethereal glow. And then she saw it. Floating on the water's surface was a small flower with luminous blue petals, radiating a soft, almost magical light. It was not a common flower. It was the same flower she had seen in the magic mirror's vision, the flower that grew in the gardens of her son, the king's castle. A thread of hope, as fragile as the flower itself, ignited in Lyra's chest. The spring, the flower, the guardian's statue. Everything seemed to be part of a larger puzzle, a path laid out by those who came before. The crown in her hand seemed to pulse now, a gentle warmth spreading through her fingers. She was on the right path, but what did the flower mean, and the well? The tunnel had led to a place of even deeper mysteries, and the journey was far from over. Lyra knew she needed to understand, needed to follow the signs, for with each step, her son's future became more real and the danger more imminent. The sight of the statue, a petrified replica of the horror they had faced, froze Lyra's blood. Leah and Leo, their small bodies trembling, clung to her, their muffled cries echoing in the damp chamber. It was a cruel and silent reminder that danger, though momentarily contained, hung over them, a shadow that refused to disappear. Lyra hugged them tightly, her heart pounding erratically, trying to convey a calm she herself did not possess. Her eyes, however, could not stray from the statue, which seemed to watch them with a cold malevolence, its red stone eyes reflecting the lantern's faint light. But then, her eyes were drawn to the spring in the center of the chamber. The luminous blue flower, floating on the surface of the dark water, radiated a soft, almost ethereal light. It was the same flower. The flower she had seen in the magic mirror's vision, the flower that adorned the gardens of her son, the king's castle. A wave of hope, as fragile as the flower's own petals, washed away Lyra's terror. It was no accident. It couldn't be. This place, this spring, was a sign, a confirmation that she was on the right path, guided by a force greater than despair. The crown in her hands began to pulse with greater intensity, a gentle warmth spreading through her fingers, as if responding to the flower's presence and the chamber's mystical energy. It was a call, a silent guidance. Lyra felt compelled to approach, to unravel the mystery that awaited her. "Stay close to me, my loves," she whispered to the children, who, though still frightened, seemed mesmerized by the flower's light. With hesitant steps, Lyra moved towards the spring. As she drew closer, the lantern's light revealed more details on the chamber walls. Ancient inscriptions, carved into the stone with a precision that defied time, adorned the well's perimeter. These were symbols she had never seen, but which seemed to vibrate with an ancestral energy. a forgotten language that spoke of kingdoms and prophecies. Lyra knelt at the edge of the spring, the crown still firmly in her hands. The water was crystalline, despite the well's darkness, and the blue flower floated serenely, its petals emitting a mesmerizing glow. She extended her hand, the crown lightly brushing the water's surface. The instant the ancient metal touched the water, a wave of energy surged through the chamber. The blue flower intensified its glow, and the well water began to bubble and swirl, not with the fury of a current, but with the gentle dance of an enchantment. The silvery moonlight, which had previously only kissed the surface, now seemed to plunge into the well's depths, mixing with the blue glow of the flower. The air in the chamber grew dense, charged with a magical electricity. Then, the water's surface transformed. It was no longer a reflection of the moon or the lantern, but a living screen, a liquid mirror that began to project images. At first, they were just blurs of light and shadow, but soon they became sharper. Lyra saw a map, a detailed map of tunnels and underground passages. Some she vaguely recognized, others completely unknown. A line of blue light, pulsing, traced a specific path through this dark labyrinth, pointing in a direction Lyra had not considered. But the map was not the only revelation. Among the passages, flashes of danger emerged, dark shadows moving, the gleam of red eyes in the darkness, the distant sound of a roar that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. It was a path, yes, but a path fraught with traps and creatures that guarded the secrets of the underworld. Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. The vision was not just a guide, but a warning. Her son's future as king would not be achieved without sacrifice and without facing the horrors that lurked in the shadows. The crown in her hand pulsed now with a feverish urgency, as if the very magic of the spring was charging it, infusing it with an even greater purpose. The blue flower at the center of the liquid vision seemed to be the starting point, the first step in a journey that was becoming increasingly dangerous and complex. When the vision began to fade, the water returning to its calm surface, Lyra realized that the inscriptions around the well had lit up, revealing a phrase in an ancient tongue, but which now somehow she could comprehend. The heart of the kingdom lies where the moonlight meets the whisper of the earth. He who carries the crown must follow the blue star, the flower, the path, the heart of the kingdom. Lyra stood up, exhaustion and fear still present, but now mixed with renewed determination. The vision had been clear. The path was dangerous, but there was a path, and the crown, now more than a symbol, was a compass, a beacon. She looked at Leah and Leo, their faces still pale, but their eyes fixed on her, seeking security. "Come, my loves," Lyra said, her voice stronger than before, echoing in the chamber. "We have a new path to follow." She raised the lantern, its faint light dancing over the newly illuminated inscriptions and the shadowy statue. The distant howl of the creature, which seemed to have calmed, now sounded more like a lament of contained fury, a promise that danger was not far. The heart of the kingdom. What would it be? A place? An object? Lyra did not know, but the epic journey had just gained a new and terrifying purpose. They were closer to the future, but also closer to the abyss. Lyra's decision echoed in the chamber, more a whisper of courage than a battle cry. "Come, my loves." The words were for Leah and Leo, but also for herself, a mantra against the fear that still clung to her bones. The guardian statue, with its petrified red eyes, seemed to mock her audacity, a silent reminder of the terror that awaited them if they failed. But the crown in her hands, now a pulsing beacon of blue light, was her answer. The blue star, the promised guide, was no longer the distant flower in the water, but a living flame in her own palm. Lyra turned, the lantern raised, and the light danced over the newly illuminated inscriptions, which now seemed more a map than a prophecy. The path the liquid vision had traced was clear, a narrow, dark tunnel that opened in the wall opposite the entrance, almost invisible in the gloom. It was not an inviting path, but it was the only one. Leah and Leo, still pale and clinging to her legs, moved with her, their small steps echoing in the chamber. With each step Lyra took, the crown in her hands intensified its blue glow, a rhythmic pulsation that seemed to synchronize with the beats of her own heart. It was a comforting warmth, but also an immense responsibility. They left the well chamber, the silvery moonlight, and the luminous blue flower behind, plunging into the darkness of the new tunnel. This was not like the others. The walls were of a darker, almost black stone, and the humidity seemed denser, the air heavier. The inscriptions here were deeper, older, symbols that seemed to whisper stories of a forgotten time. The whisper of the earth from the prophecy began to manifest. It was not an audible sound at first, but a subtle vibration, a low-frequency hum that seemed to come from the very depths of the rock. It resonated in her ears, a dissonant melody that caused a slight discomfort, a tremor in her teeth. Lyra felt the ground beneath her feet vibrate, and the air became even denser, almost palpable. The crown pulsed more strongly, and the blue light emanating from it not only illuminated the path, but seemed to push back the shadows, creating a small oasis of clarity in the oppressive darkness. Lyra noticed that the blue light seemed to react to the whisper of the earth, intensifying where the vibration was strongest, as if the crown was translating the language of the earth. The tunnel began to descend on a gentle incline, and the air grew colder, charged with a metallic and earthy smell. Lyra felt the weight of her body, the pregnancy, every muscle protesting against the effort. But the image of her son as king, the promise of a future, was a shield against fatigue. Suddenly the tunnel narrowed drastically. The walls closed in, forcing Lyra to stoop and hold the children even closer. The whisper of the earth grew louder, almost a lament, and the vibration in the ground increased, causing small stones to roll from the walls. Leah and Leo whimpered, frightened. Pressing themselves against their mother, Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. It was not just the cold of the tunnel, it was the feeling that they were not alone. The blue light of the crown flickered, and for a brief instant, she saw not a creature, but a pattern, a trap. Rows of sharp thorns camouflaged in the darkness protruded from the narrow walls, ready to pierce anyone who tried to pass carelessly. "Careful, my loves," she whispered, her voice strained. The crown in her hand pulsed frantically, the blue light focusing on the thorns, revealing them before they could be a danger. It was a test, an ancient trap, perhaps activated by the very whisper of the earth that now seemed to want to disorient them. Lyra moved with agonizing caution, her pregnant body contorting to avoid the thorns. She used the crown as a staff, the blue light illuminating each obstacle, allowing her to guide the children through the sharp points. Her fingers brushed the cold stone, feeling the rough texture and the imminent danger. Every movement was a calculation, every breath an effort. The whisper of the earth seemed to intensify with her difficulty, a silent, malicious laugh from the depths. Lyra felt exhaustion, but adrenaline propelled her. She was the protector, the guide. Her son's future depended on her ability to overcome every trap, every challenge. After what seemed an eternity, the tunnel widened again, and the thorns were left behind. Lyra stopped, panting, leaning against a cold wall, feeling sweat trickle down her forehead. Leah and Leo were trembling but unharmed. She hugged them tightly, kissing their heads. The crown in her hand calmed its glow, but the pulsation was still there, a constant reminder of her mission. The whisper of the earth diminished slightly, but did not disappear, becoming again a background hum, a constant presence. The path ahead was a wider tunnel, its walls adorned with faded murals that told stories of kings and queens, of battles and victories. These were images Lyra had never seen, but which felt familiar, like echoes of a distant past that connected directly to her son's future. However, the sensation of being watched returned, stronger than ever. The distant howl of the creature, which had once seemed a lament, now sounded closer, more predatory, a warning that the Guardian was aware of their intrusion. The crown pulsed again, a silent alert. Lyra raised the lantern, its faint light dancing over the murals and the darkness ahead. The heart of the kingdom. With each step, the mystery deepened and the danger became more tangible. They were on the path, guided by the blue star, but the abyss was opening before them. And Lyra knew the next ordeal would be even greater. The whisper of the earth now seemed a countdown, and her son's future a prize to be won at a terrible cost. Lyra, Leah, and Leo pressed onward. The tunnel, now wider, offered a brief respite from the thorns, but not from the fear that clung to them like a second skin. The walls, once bare stone, were adorned with faded murals, their colors pale with time and dampness, but still visible under the lantern's flickering light. They depicted scenes of a glorious past, echoes of a civilization that flourished beneath the earth, crowned kings and queens, their faces noble and stern, yet also marked by wisdom and the weight of responsibility, warriors wielding swords in epic battles against shadows and beasts, their eyes filled with bravery, sages consulting stars and arcane symbols, seeking guidance in the depths. Lyra paused before one mural in particular. It showed a pregnant woman wearing a crown similar to hers, but made of pure gold, not blue light. She was in an underground garden, offering a blue flower to a smiling child who extended his hands in a gesture of acceptance. The image was a mirror of her own destiny, a promise and a burden, a lineage she now carried. The whisper of the earth intensified, no longer a distant hum, but a deep vibration that resonated in her bones, making the stone beneath her feet tremble with increasing force. Small particles of dust and tiny rock fragments fell from the ceiling, and the air, already heavy, became dense with an almost electric energy, foreshadowing something imminent. The howl. Now it was not distant, but close, reverberating through the tunnel like subterranean thunder, a guttural sound, full of ancestral fury and hunger that seemed to tear the very fabric of darkness. Leah and Leo huddled, their small bodies trembling uncontrollably, their faces buried in Lyra's legs. Lyra hugged them tightly, her heart beating like a war drum in her chest, a frantic rhythm that echoed the danger. The crown in her hand pulsed frantically, its blue light intensifying, casting dancing shadows that seemed to twist and stretch like spectral claws. The light revealed something at the tunnel's far end, not a clear shape, but a movement, a dark, shapeless mass that dragged itself along the walls, almost merging with the shadow itself, a predator perfectly adapted to the darkness. A pair of red eyes, like glowing embers, gleamed in the oppressive gloom, fixed on them with a cold, predatory intelligence. The Guardian, the creature the vision had warned of, was now there, real and menacing. It was large, with gnarled limbs and scaly skin that seemed to absorb light, making it almost invisible. A smell of damp earth and something else, something putrid and ancient, filled the air. Lyra knew she could not fight. Pregnant, with 2 small children and exhausted, she was vulnerable. But the crown, the blue star, was not just a guide, it was a shield, a weapon of light against the darkness. She raised the crown, and the blue light exploded in an intense pulse, not just illuminating but repelling. The creature hissed, a sound that made the air vibrate and the ground tremble, and recoiled slightly, its red eyes flickering as if the light physically hurt it. The whisper of the earth became a deafening roar, and the tunnel walls began to yield in places. small stones dangerously collapsing. Lyra realized that the creature and the whisper were connected, the creature being a manifestation of the angry earth itself, an elemental guardian of the depths. Her eyes swept the walls, searching for an exit, anything. She saw a small crack in the wall, almost imperceptible, obscured by the crown's light, which now focused on it, as if pointing the way. It was too narrow for the creature to pass, but perhaps— "This way, my loves," she cried, her voice hoarse with effort and fear, pulling Leah and Leo with all the strength she had left. The crown's light intensified in the crack, a beacon of hope. Lyra squeezed through the opening, her pregnant body barely fitting, feeling the cold stone scrape her clothes and the pressure on her belly. Leah and Leo followed, crying but obedient, their small bodies sliding through the narrow crack. The creature roared in fury, its sharp claws scratching the stone in a desperate attempt to reach them, but the crack was too narrow, an insurmountable obstacle for its shapeless mass. They were safe for now, safe from the Guardian's immediate fury. The crack opened into a smaller, circular chamber with a vaulted ceiling that seemed to curve back on itself, adorned with strange glyphs that glowed faintly. The air here was stiller, warmer, and the whisper of the earth was a distant murmur again, a background melody that seemed to soothe the nerves. In the center of the chamber there was a rustic stone pedestal, and on it an object. It was not a crown, nor a jewel of material value. It was a crystal sphere, the size of a human heart, pulsing with a soft greenish light, like a heart beating at its own primordial rhythm. Around the crystal, ancient inscriptions glowed with a faint light, and Lyra somehow could now comprehend them, as if the crown had awakened a dormant part of her mind. The heart of the kingdom. The prophecy. This was it. Not a place, but an object. The vital essence of everything. The crystal sphere seemed to breathe, and within it, Lyra saw flashes of images. A prosperous kingdom, green fields bathed in sunlight, happy people working and living in peace, and at the center of it all, a child, her son, with a crown of light on his head, ruling with wisdom. But she also saw shadows, threats lurking at the edges of the vision, foreshadowing future challenges, inevitable sacrifices. The heart of the kingdom was not just an artifact, but a source of power, a repository of memories and of the future, a link between the past and what was to come. The crown in her hand pulsed in perfect synchronicity with the crystal sphere, as if they were recognizing each other, two parts of the same purpose. The journey was not over. The heart of the kingdom was there, but what should she do with it? And the creature, the furious guardian, was still out there, waiting, its presence a constant threat. Her son's future was closer than ever, but the price to pay seemed to increase with each soft, rhythmic beat of the heart of the kingdom. Lyra felt a new urgency, a need to act, to protect not only her children, but the very destiny that was now in her hands. The heart of the kingdom pulsed. Its soft, hypnotic greenish light filled the small chamber, painting the ancient glyphs on the vaulted ceiling with an ethereal glow. Lyra, with Leah and Leo still nestled at her legs, felt the crystal sphere's energy penetrate her very being, calming her frantic heartbeat, but intensifying the urgency in her soul. The images within the crystal were no longer fleeting flashes. They became a living tapestry, unfolding with vivid detail before her eyes. She saw her son, no longer a helpless baby, but a young king, wearing the crown of light the mirror's vision had promised, seated on a throne of polished stone, ruling a kingdom that stretched beneath a blue sky, bathed in golden sunlight. Verdant fields extended as far as the eye could see. Rivers snaked through fertile valleys, and prosperous cities rose, their towers touching the clouds. The people, smiling and at peace, worked in harmony, their voices singing melodies of gratitude and hope. It was a future of prosperity, of justice, of a legacy Lyra could barely conceive. But the visions were not only of glory. Shadows lurked at the edges of the tapestry, shapeless and menacing figures that stirred at the kingdom's borders, foreshadowing wars and challenges. She saw her son, older, his face marked by responsibility, but his eyes still shining with the same determination she felt now. She saw sacrifices, losses, moments of despair, but always, in the end, the light of hope prevailed. Guided by the wisdom and courage of a just king, the heart of the kingdom showed not only triumph, but the price of greatness, the burden of destiny. The crown in her hand, the blue star pulsed in perfect synchronicity with the crystal sphere, its blue light dancing with the green, as if they were conversing, sharing ancient secrets. The inscriptions around the pedestal, once merely incomprehensible symbols, now seemed to light up in her mind, their words flowing like a river of ancestral knowledge. The heart of the kingdom is the eye that sees, the voice that guides, the key that reveals. As Lyra absorbed the visions and words, the whisper of the earth outside intensified again, no longer a distant murmur, but a deep growl that made the chamber walls vibrate. Small grains of sand and dust fell from the ceiling, and the air became heavy, foreshadowing the Guardian's fury. The creature's howl, now muffled by the stone, was a sound of frustration and rage, a constant reminder that they were cornered, but not forgotten. The heart of the kingdom's light, in response to the growing threat, intensified, projecting a concentrated beam onto a specific section of the circular wall. It was not just any wall. It was a smooth, dark surface, which until then seemed just another part of the rock, adorned with the same glyphs as the rest of the chamber. But under the focus of the greenish light, the surface began to ripple, to tremble, like water in a basin. The glyphs moved, rearranged themselves, and the dark stone became translucent, revealing an infinite depth. It was the mirror, the magic mirror that the premise had promised, now revealed not by cleaning thorns, but by the activation of the heart of the kingdom, the true eye that saw. Its surface did not reflect the chamber, nor Lyra and her children. Instead, it showed a new image, a more focused and urgent vision than the crystal's projections. The mirror revealed a dark cavern, its walls encrusted with crystals that glowed with a violet light. In the center, on an obsidian altar, rested a crown. Not the crown of light Lyra held, but a crown of pure gold, adorned with precious stones that seemed to absorb and emit the ambient light. It was the crown of the kingdom, the true insignia of power, the one her son should wear. The image in the mirror was not just a vision, it was a map, a guide. Faint lines of light extended from the crown in the mirror, tracing a complex path through tunnels and underground chambers, indicating the relic's exact location. "The hidden crown," Lyra whispered, her voice choked with emotion and understanding. The blue star in her hand pulsed with even greater force, as if confirming the revealed truth. The mirror not only showed the future, but also the path to secure it. The Guardian's roar outside became a violent tremor, and a crack formed in the chamber ceiling, directly above the mirror, small stones falling to the floor. Time was running out. Lyra knew she couldn't stay there forever. The heart of the kingdom had fulfilled its first function, revealing the mirror and the path. Now she had to act. She raised the blue crown, its light becoming a beacon of determination. Fear was still there, a knot in her stomach, but the vision of her son's future, the image of the crown waiting, propelled her. Leah and Leo, though still frightened, looked at the mirror with childish curiosity, perhaps sensing the moment's importance. Lyra knew that leaving that chamber would mean facing the Guardian again, or encountering a new danger. But the path was clear, and her son's destiny depended on her courage. She squeezed Leah and Leo's hands, feeling the fragility and strength of their small hands. "Come, my loves," she said, her voice firm. "The kingdom awaits us." The heart of the kingdom continued to pulse, a constant reminder of the life she carried and the future she was destined to protect. The journey, far from over, had only revealed its next, and perhaps most perilous step. The decision, once a heavy burden, now transformed into a surge of energy that coursed through Lyra's veins. Her son's future, the promise of a prosperous kingdom, the image of the golden crown in the mirror, all merged into a single, powerful motivation. The Guardian's roar outside, a constant reminder of the imminent threat, only solidified her determination. There was no time for hesitation. The heart of the kingdom pulsed, its greenish light dancing with the blue glow of the blue star in Lyra's hand. The mirror, once a dark surface, now radiated the image of the violet crystal cavern, and the lines of light that traced the path to the crown projected outwards from its surface, extending across the chamber. They not only showed the way in the mirror, but traced it on the very walls and floor, like a luminous map unfolding in real time. The lines of light converged on a specific point on the circular wall, a glyph that until then seemed indistinguishable from the others, but which now shone with a particular intensity. Lyra, feeling the urgency in every beat of the heart of the kingdom, walked towards it, Leah and Leo clinging to her legs, their eyes wide with fear and fascination. The air in the chamber was growing denser, and the cracks in the ceiling widened, releasing a fine shower of dust and small rock fragments. Time was truly running out. As she touched the glyph, the blue star in her hand vibrated, and the heart of the kingdom emitted a pulse of energy that resonated through the stone. The glyph lit up with a golden light, and the section of the wall around it began to rotate slowly, revealing a dark, narrow opening. It was not a door, but a natural fissure, almost imperceptible, that opened into the unknown. The smell of damp earth and minerals invaded the chamber, an invitation to the depths. "This way, my loves," Lyra whispered, her voice firm despite the tremor she felt. She squeezed through the opening, her pregnant body again meeting resistance, the cold stone scraping against her clothes. Leah and Leo followed, their small bodies sliding with more ease, but their whimpers echoed in the confined space. The Guardian's roar intensified, seeming to come from all directions, as if the very earth was screaming in fury at their escape. The fissure opened into a dark, winding tunnel, where the light of the heart of the kingdom and the blue star was the only source of illumination. The mirror's lines of light continued to guide them, painting a faint path on the uneven floor, indicating every turn, every deviation. The air here was heavy, damp, and the whisper of the earth was more a distant moan, a melancholic melody that seemed to lament the intrusion. Lyra advanced cautiously, her free hand extended to feel the rough walls, her heart pounding in her chest. Leah and Leo, now calmer but still frightened, held her hands tightly, their small steps echoing in the oppressive silence of the tunnel. She could feel the creature's presence behind them, its fury palpable, an invisible weight that propelled them forward. With each step, Lyra wondered what else awaited her. The mirror had shown the destination, but not the dangers of the path. The tunnel narrowed and widened, its walls adorned with strange rock formations that resembled petrified claws. At certain points, water seeped from the rocks, forming small puddles on the ground, reflecting the greenish and bluish light in a kaleidoscope of colors. The silence was broken only by their own footsteps and the constant dripping of water. Suddenly, the lines of light on the ground flickered and intensified, pointing to a specific section of the wall. There was no visible opening, but the stone there seemed darker, more porous. As she approached, Lyra felt a strange heat emanating from the rock, and a low hum filled the air. It was a sound she did not recognize, but which sounded dangerously artificial, different from the natural sounds of the cavern. The blue star in her hand began to vibrate more strongly, and the heart of the kingdom pulsed at an accelerated rhythm, as if they were alerting her to imminent danger. The images in the mirror, which she could still feel in her mind, became more blurred, the shadows at the edges of the vision more prominent. Lyra hesitated, feeling a shiver down her spine. What was the mirror indicating? A secret passage? Or an obstacle that would require more than just courage? She knew she couldn't go back. The Guardian's roar, though more distant, was still a constant threat. With a sigh of determination, she approached the dark wall, the light of the blue star and the heart of the kingdom concentrating on it, revealing that the rock was not just dark, but was covered by a thin layer of crystalline material that shimmered with a faint reddish light. These were not ordinary crystals. They seemed alive. As she touched the surface, a sharp pain shot through her hand. The crystals were sharp as blades, and a strange, almost electric energy emanated from them. A low moan escaped her lips. The path to the crown would not be easy. The mirror had revealed the next step, but also the next challenge, a barrier of pulsating crystals, silent guardians of an even deeper secret. Lyra knew she would need more than her own strength to get through. The sharp pain that shot through Lyra's hand was not just physical, it was an electric shock that vibrated to her bones, a brutal warning of the living, hostile nature of those crystals. They were not mere geological formations. They were sentinels, pulsing with an energy that seemed to drain the very light from the environment. The reddish layer covering them shimmered with a cold malice, and the low hum that had previously filled the air now intensified, transforming into a piercing lament that seemed to bore into her mind. Leah and Leo, sensing the tension in their mother's body, pressed even closer against her legs, their small faces contorted in a mixture of fear and confusion. The heart of the kingdom emitted a strong pulse, almost a desperate heartbeat, and the blue star in her hand vibrated with a feverish intensity, its bluish light battling the crystal's reddish glow. The images in the mirror, once so clear in her mind, now distorted, the lines of light tracing the path twisting like frightened snakes. "We cannot go back," Lyra whispered to herself, more than to the children. The Guardian's roar, though muffled by the stone, was still a constant presence, a reminder of the imminent death that awaited them if they hesitated. The path to the crown, to her son's future, lay ahead, through that pulsating barrier. She withdrew her hand, her skin tingling and a small reddish cut marking where the crystals had wounded her. The blood, dark in the dim light, looked like an ink stain on her palm. But the pain did not paralyze her, it awakened her. It reminded her of the approaching pain of childbirth, of the pain of losing her husband, of the pain of a kingdom in ruins. And it reminded her of the strength that pain could generate. The crystals seemed to feed on her hesitation, their reddish glow intensifying, the hum growing in volume. Lyra closed her eyes for an instant, taking a deep breath, seeking calm amidst the chaos. She thought of her son, of the small heart beating within her, of the promise of a future she carried. She thought of Leah and Leo, their innocent faces depending on her to survive, the cleaning of the wall of thorns. The premise had spoken of it. It was not a physical cleaning, she realized, but a purification. Those crystals, though beautiful in their dangerous form, were a manifestation of a corrupt energy, an obstacle created to repel, and the only thing that could purify was life, hope, love. With new determination, Lyra raised the blue star. Its light, once just a beacon, now seemed to expand, enveloping her hand and arm in a protective glow. The heart of the kingdom in Leo's chest pulsed in unison with hers, and she felt a wave of vital energy flow through her body, concentrating in her hand. She extended her hand again, but this time not to touch. She placed it a few inches from the crystal's surface, projecting the blue star's bluish light directly onto them. At first, the reddish crystals reacted with fury, their glow intensifying, the hum transforming into a piercing scream. But Lyra did not recoil. She pressed, not with physical force, but with the strength of her will, with the purity of her intention. "You will not stop us," she whispered, her voice firm, imbued with an authority she did not know she possessed. "I carry life, I carry the future, and I will pass." As she spoke, the blue star's blue light began to penetrate the crystal's reddish layer. Slowly, painfully, the scarlet glow began to fade, like a dying ember. The hum diminished, transforming into a confused murmur, and the crystals, once sharp and menacing, began to soften, their points rounding, their surface becoming translucent. They were not dissolving, Lyra realized, but were being transformed. The electrical energy emanating from them calmed, and a sensation of gentle warmth replaced the sharp pain. It was as if the blue star's light was rewriting their nature, purifying their essence. Leah and Leo, sensing the change in energy, stopped whimpering and looked with wide eyes at the crystal wall. The heart of the kingdom in Leo's chest now pulsed at a calmer, more powerful rhythm, and the lines of light in the mirror in her mind cleared again, indicating the path ahead with renewed precision. The crystals continued to transform, the blue light enveloping them completely, until the section of the wall became a curtain of translucent crystals glowing with a soft, blue-violet hue. There was no more pain, no electricity. The barrier now seemed a shimmering veil, a silent invitation. Lyra, exhausted but invigorated by the victory, touched the surface. It was cold and smooth like polished glass. The crystals parted, not opening like a door, but retracting to the sides, revealing a narrow, dark passage that stretched into the depths. The air coming from there was colder, damper, and carried a smell of moss and ancient stone. The heart of the kingdom and the blue star projected their combined lights into the passage, and the mirror's lines of light extended, painting a clear path on the uneven floor. The violet crystal cavern, which the mirror had shown, seemed closer now, the promise of the golden crown more palpable. "We did it, my loves," Lyra whispered, her voice choked with emotion and relief. She squeezed Leah and Leo's hands, feeling the warmth of their small palms. The Guardian outside was still a threat, but for a brief moment they had found a small victory. The passage was steeper than the previous tunnel, spiraling down into the heart of the earth. The walls were of dark rock, but here and there small veins of a silvery mineral glittered in the light like stars trapped in the stone. The whisper of the earth was stronger here, a chorus of distant voices that seemed to tell ancient stories. Lyra knew that every step was a risk, every shadow a potential danger, but the vision of the golden crown, the image of her son as king, was a beacon that propelled her. She had purified the crystal barrier, revealing not only a path, but a new layer of her own strength. The journey was far from over, and the next challenge awaited in the dark depths. But Lyra was ready. She was the guardian of the future, and nothing would stop her. The narrow passage swallowed the light, transforming it into mere visual whispers. Lyra, with Leah and Leo firmly clutching her hands, felt the air grow denser, colder, laden with the damp smell of wet earth and the metallic pungency of unknown minerals. Each step echoed, amplified by the oppressive silence, and the steep descent demanded all her attention. The dark rock walls, dotted with shimmering veins of a silvery mineral, seemed to close in on them, creating a sense of claustrophobia that tightened Lyra's chest. The whisper of the earth, once a distant melody, now intensified, transforming into a chorus of indistinct voices that seemed to come from all directions. They were not words, but a cacophony of emotions, ancient laments, forgotten laughter, echoes of battles long lost. It was as if the very rock was alive, breathing memories of past eras. Leah and Leo huddled, their small faces pale in the blue-violet light projected by the blue star and the heart of the kingdom. Lyra pressed them against her, trying to convey a calm she herself did not feel. The mirror's lines of light, which had once traced a clear path, now danced and twisted on the uneven floor, as if struggling against the whisper's interference. The images in her mind grew more fragmented, quick glimpses of a golden crown, an empty throne, and a growing darkness that seemed to swallow everything. Danger was not only behind them, but manifesting in new and insidious ways ahead. Suddenly, the whisper focused, and a single voice, deep and resonant, emerged from the chorus. It was not a human voice, but something older, more fundamental, like the sound of rocks shifting in the earth's heart. "The king's path is paved with sacrifices," the voice reverberated, not in Lyra's ears, but directly in her mind. "The crown is not given, it is earned. What are you willing to give?" A shiver ran through Lyra. It was a test. The mirror had shown the destiny, but not the price. She thought of her husband, of the life he had given. She thought of the kingdom, of the hope she carried, and she thought of her children, the future she had sworn to protect. What was she willing to give? Everything. She was willing to give everything. "My life," Lyra replied aloud, her voice trembling but firm. "My soul. All that I am and all that I will be, so that my son may live and reign." The whisper seemed to hesitate, the voices quieting for an instant, as if assessing her sincerity. Then the resonant voice spoke again, but this time with a tone of warning. "The offering is accepted, but the price is heavy. With each step, each choice, you will feel the crown's weight, and not all sacrifices are of blood." As the voice faded, the mirror's lines of light stabilized again, pointing to an opening ahead. The passage widened abruptly, revealing a vast and imposing cavern. It was the violet crystal cavern the mirror had shown, but it was not as Lyra had imagined. The walls, ceiling, and floor were covered in a profusion of crystals that radiated a soft, ethereal light in shades of amethyst, lavender, and indigo. It was a breathtaking spectacle of beauty, but there was something unsettling in its perfection. The crystals were so dense, they formed organic structures, like petrified trees or giant corals, creating a labyrinth of shimmering forms. The air in the cavern was strangely still, and the silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the whisper that had accompanied them. In the center of the cavern, a crystalline formation rose like an altar, taller and brighter than the others. The mirror's lines of light converged on it, and the heart of the kingdom pulsed with a feverish, almost painful intensity. Lyra knew the crown was near, but something was wrong. As they approached the altar, Lyra noticed that the nearest crystals were not just violet. They had a subtly reddish glow in their depths, a color she recognized from the crystals she had purified in the wall. And atop the altar there was no golden crown. Instead rested a massive crystal, pulsing with an intense violet light, but with dark, serpentine veins running across its surface, like cracks in a perfect jewel. The images in the mirror in her mind became sharp again, but now showed something Lyra had not seen before. The golden crown was inside. The crystal, imprisoned, and the dark veins on the crystal's surface seemed to be the same shadows that had obscured the edges of her vision. The crystal was a prison, and the shadows were the corruption that held it. The Guardian, though still distant, let out a roar that made the cavern itself tremble, and the violet crystals vibrated in response. their lights flickering like beating hearts. The threat was approaching and time was running out. Lyra looked at the crystal on the altar, at the crown imprisoned within it. What was she willing to give? The Whisper had asked. And now she knew that the sacrifice was not just a promise, but an action that needed to be performed. The crown was there, visible, but still unattainable. And the next challenge, the true test, was about to begin. The sight of the crown imprisoned within the massive crystal, its dark serpentine veins pulsing with a malignant energy, struck Lyra with the force of lightning. It was not a physical obstacle to overcome, but a manifestation of the very corruption that had plagued the kingdom. The Whisper of the Earth had warned, "Not all sacrifices are of blood." And now Lyra understood. The price would not be a life, but the purification of a soul, the transmutation of a darkness that seemed as ancient as the stone itself. The Guardian's roar, closer now, made the violet crystals vibrate, their lights dancing in a frenzy of colors. Time was an enemy as relentless as the approaching creature. Lyra squeezed Leah and Leo's hands, feeling the tremor in their small bodies. Her eyes fixed on the altar, on the crystal that held her son's destiny. The blue star in her chest pulsed with a more intense light, and the heart of the kingdom, in Leo's chest, echoed that energy, as if both artifacts recognized the magnitude of the challenge. The mirror's lines of light in her mind, once a path, now focused on the crystal, no longer showing the crown, but the dark veins that enveloped it. They twisted like roots of a disease, and the images the mirror projected were of shadows dissipating, of a light breaking through from within. The message was clear. The corruption needed to be expelled, not shattered. Lyra approached the altar, each step echoing in the cavern's oppressive silence, which was broken only by the Guardian's distant roar. The air around the crystal was heavy, charged with a coldness that was not physical, but spiritual, an aura of despair and loss. She extended her hand, hesitant, and touched the crystal's cold, smooth surface. The dark veins beneath her fingers seemed to writhe, and a sensation of repulsion and subtle pain invaded her mind. It was the pain of the kingdom, the pain of her people, condensed in that stone. "No," she whispered, her voice firm despite the fear that tried to root itself in her heart. "I will not allow this to continue." She closed her eyes, concentrating. The blue star in her chest radiated warmth, and Lyra allowed that energy to flow through her, to her arms, to her hands. She was not just touching the crystal, she was connecting to it, feeling its corrupted essence. What she had done with the Wall of Thorns, she would do again, but on a much larger scale. It was not just willpower, but the purity of her intention, the hope she carried for the future, for her son, for the kingdom. "I am the king's mother," she declared, not to the crystal, but to the darkness it represented. "I carry life, I carry hope, and I will purify it." As she spoke, the blue star's blue-violet light began to intensify, not just in her chest, but flowing into the crystal. The dark veins resisted, pulsing with an energy of their own, trying to repel the light. Lyra felt an overwhelming pressure, as if the crystal was trying to absorb her own life force, her hope transforming it into despair. It was the sacrifice. The crystal demanded her faith, her resilience, her very essence. The heart of the kingdom in Leo's chest began to glow with a golden light, and a soft hum filled the cavern. The energy of the two artifacts united, channeled through Lyra, creating a beam of light that penetrated deep into the crystal. The dark veins began to contract, to recede, like shadows fleeing the dawn. But the struggle was fierce. Lyra felt a sharp pain in her womb, a warning that the tension was affecting her child. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she refused to yield. "For you, my son," she thought, channeling all her strength, all her love, "for a future of light." The Guardian's roar was now deafening, and the cavern floor trembled violently. Fragments of crystals fell from the ceiling, and the sound of rock breaking echoed through the vast chamber. He was here. Lyra could feel his monstrous presence, the vibration of his heavy footsteps approaching the cavern entrance. She had only seconds. With a cry of pure determination, Lyra pushed more energy into the crystal. The blue-gold light erupted from her hands, enveloping the massive crystal in a shimmering cocoon. The dark veins, finally subdued, began to dissolve, transforming into dark smoke that dissipated into the air. The crystal, once opaque and menacing, became translucent, its violet color pure and vibrant. At the exact moment the last shadow dissolved, the crystal on the altar cracked. It did not break, but opened, like a flower blooming in slow motion. And there, resting in its center, bathed in a golden light that seemed to come from within, was the crown. It was not a simple gold crown, but an intricate work of art, encrusted with gems that sparkled with the colors of the rainbow. And atop it a single, perfect blue-violet crystal, identical to those that now formed the cavern. Lyra extended her hand, trembling, and took the crown. It was lighter than she expected, but its power was palpable, pulsing in her hands. The moment her fingers touched the gold, a wave of energy coursed through her, and the images in the mirror in her mind became crystalline. Her son, no longer a baby, but a young king, seated on a throne with that same crown on his head, and the kingdom bathed in light, prosperous and at peace. But the vision was abruptly broken. A deafening crash echoed through the cavern, and the entrance crumbled into a cloud of dust and rocks. The creature, the Guardian, had arrived. Its red eyes gleamed in the darkness, and its massive body, covered in scales and thorns, filled the opening. A roar of primordial fury shook the air, and Lyra knew that the final battle was about to begin. She had the crown, the promise of the future, but now she needed to fight to keep it. Leah and Leo huddled behind her, their small hearts pounding wildly. Lyra clutched the crown to her chest, feeling the warmth and power emanating from it. She was the guardian of the future, and she would not back down. The crash that followed the Guardian's emergence was not just a sound, but a shockwave that shook Lyra's very soul. The creature, a materialized nightmare, filled the cavern entrance, its dark scales and sharp thorns reflecting the violet light of the crystals with a sinister gleam. Its eyes like glowing embers fixed on Lyra, on the heart of the kingdom pulsing in Leo's chest. And on the crown she clutched to herself. A smell of damp earth and something ancient putrid filled the air. Leah and Leo, behind her, let out small cries of terror. Lyra felt the icy fear try to paralyze her, but the crown in her hands pulsed with a comforting warmth, a reminder of the promise she carried. The vision of her son, a just king in a kingdom of light, burned in her mind, a shield against despair. She could not fail, not now. The Guardian took a step forward, and the ground trembled again. Its steps were heavy, each one a threat, and the sound of its claws scraping against the crystals was deafening. Lyra recoiled instinctively, shielding the children with her body. She had no weapons, no physical strength to face a creature of that size. But she had something more, the purity of her intention, a mother's unconditional love, and the artifacts that guided her. The blue star in her chest began to radiate a stronger light, and the heart of the kingdom in Leo's chest echoed that energy, transforming it into a golden glow that danced on the crystal walls. The crown in her hands, in turn, seemed to absorb and amplify this light, transforming it into a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. The Guardian let out another roar, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of reality. It extended one of its massive claws towards Lyra, not to attack her directly, but to crush the crown in her hands. It was a gesture of possession, of denial of the future. "No!" Lyra cried, her voice surprisingly strong, full of an authority she did not know she possessed. She raised the crown above her head, not as a weapon, but as a symbol, a shield of light. The moment she did so, the blue-gold light emanating from it intensified, forming a shimmering barrier between her and the creature. The Guardian's claw collided with the invisible barrier, and a piercing sound filled the cavern, like metal scraping against crystal.